Generational date's an arbitrary thing. Technically, Zoomers, in terms of the generational dates, begin in 1997 to 2012. But the important thing to bear in mind when it comes to talking about generations is the dates don't matter as much as the environment and the landscape. So the reason why Zoomers are so, Zoomerish as it were, so different from previous generations in so many ways, is related to the dates to some degree, because it's during those dates that technology really takes off and becomes entrenched in our society. If you were to look back a long time ago, say, random date, somebody born in 650 AD in Britain, how different would he be from somebody born in 675 AD? Technically a full generational difference. I doubt there would be very many differences at all, because technology is always the transformative factor here. For most of history, humanity has been pretty stagnant. Technology hasn't shifted, maybe little bits and pieces here and there, but not like this. So Zoomers are a generation defined by technology, a technology that has, in many different ways, and most saliently, interacted with our social apparatus to a degree that no one could have seen before. So sure, throughout the Roman Empire, there were different iterations of the sword. You started with the gladius, the short sword, and then it gets somewhat longer, and it becomes something else. And there are different variations of firearms. But the reality is that Zoomers are defined by the technology of social media. It's really what's transformed their world so much and has made it so radically, fundamentally different from previous generations, especially Gen X, Boomers, and the oldest generation is still alive, the silent generation. And that's also where you get this crisscross of misunderstanding, because for the most part, the parents of Zoomers are absolutely clueless as to what situation the Zoomers are stuck in. One of the side effects of mass social media, its effect on Zoomers, is what I would refer to as a de-individuation protocol. Now, in general, people have always been, on average, somewhat collectivist. They've always followed trends. That's normal. But what the modern technological world does, as you're well aware, is it seizes upon our urges, our instincts, our inclinations, and amplifies it all. So one thing that's very apparent to me as somebody who does interact with Zoomers, I have a number of Zoomer friends, is that the Zoomer is very much subject to the massification effect that social media almost inevitably brings about. And that's what I mean about de-individuation. This usually occurs with the Zoomers that are most lost. And that's a huge demographic of mostly young men. That's why you have all the grifting, the so-called red pill, the manospherian aspects that cater to the lowest denominator, and even mainstream commentary on these things. That all refers to that demographic that is most affected by the massification, because these guys, I'm not faulting them for this whatsoever, don't really, on average, have individual interests. They don't have individual things that drive them. Sometimes they do, obviously I'm generalizing, but usually it's not the case if you observe them, you talk to them. There was a time, most of you know this, when being a gamer was kind of a thing, as in it was pretty niche. Even 10 or 15 years ago, it was still pretty niche. You said one of your hobbies was gaming, that was sort of, oh, really? Okay, I guess that's okay. Now you go back even further, and people would have thought you had 5 heads and 7,000 tongues. If you told somebody in 1993 one of your hobbies was gaming, they think, what's that? They might even ask you what you mean by that. It's just one example, but the gaming example is a good one. These days, everyone's a gamer. Yeah, to be sure, different genres of games, different types of games, but yeah, everyone is a gamer, so it's not really a big deal. Are most Zoomers gamers? Yes, most Zoomers are gamers of some sort. The use of pornography, right? Another thing that everyone's used to varying degrees throughout their lives if you've been around the bend, but Zoomers are known, at least by their own claims and the claims of others, to be addicts. That is also a consequence of this massification effect and what has happened over the last 10 years or so. More than any other generation, the Zoomers characterized by a mass of things they have in common, but very little in terms of the individual. And this goes well beyond music and the kind of shows they like to watch. These are characteristics of an entire demographic. My generation, Generation X, that didn't exist, certainly not for the boomers. So it's the universality of some of these experiences and the interactions Zoomers have with these forms of media that makes the Zoomers kind of unique and really leaves them in a lurch. Because the Zoomer has been overwhelmed by social media and technology that's led to their de-individuation, you have a lot of side effects. One of them is the inability to assess what would be satisfactory to them in their lives. Because if you think about the grifters on YouTube who are really trying to target the Zoomers, their sales pitch is pretty universal. Basically, make money, get girls. Now, sure, most guys would like to have more money, and sure, most guys would like to get more girls, but that's not an individual goal whatsoever. This just feeds into this massification. This just feeds into the de-individuation. Lots of young, lost guys have no idea what to do with themselves. They don't even know what their interests are. So they might hear a Hamza the bathrobe man and think, oh, that's really cool. I want to be like that. When you're young and you don't have any prospects, you're very easily influenced. And so none of the prescriptions given by these guys, even if they were to work by the grifters, is necessarily going to tell the lost, de-individuated Zoomer what he might want to do with his life. Getting girls and money, setting aside the fact that most of that's a scam, is not really a life path. Not really. It's not allowing the individual to explore what he may or may not be good at, what he's inclined to, etc., etc. So all these factors come together, and then you get the predatory factors as well, and it really shows and shines a light on why the Zoomers are so lost. They've been de-individuated by mass social media consumption. Because of the mass media consumption, and because they are basically, for the most part, all doing the same things, they don't really know what they are like as individuals or what they appreciate or what they're interested in. And the benchmark for success is so ridiculously, enormously high because of social media. The idea that the only way you can be successful is if you're at least a millionaire and you have at least 5 cars and you're getting women left and right. That's the illusion that every successful person is like that. And these guys get set up for massive failure. It's the worst form of keeping up with the Joneses, constantly trying to upgrade, as if that's really going to make you content. A certain amount of material success is necessary for contentment, but beyond that, you need something else. And this has been well documented. Now, there's another element here that I don't think anyone's been talking about, so I might be one of the first. I'm not going to claim credit, but I think I'm one of the first. And that is the aspect of class that plays into this. Now, hear me out here. Nobody talks about class anymore. Class has ceased to exist in the eyes of many, and I think for a number of intentional reasons that would go beyond the scope of this video. When you look at the breakdown specifically of America and social mobility and social functionality, right? Things like out-of-wedlock children, single-parent homes, i.e. single-mother homes, things of this nature, then increasingly every ethnic group is affected. The black community has it the worst, but whites have been steadily catching up, as have Hispanics and basically every group across the board. And really, when you look at the functional situations, families above all families, where do you find those? In the wealthiest brackets of society. And you can also observe that the Zoomer children of those wealthiest brackets of society are also the most functional Zoomers. Most of them, on average, do not have the issues that plague the typical Zoomer as we have come to know him, almost as a metaphor for the lost soul or human dysfunction of a sort. And I'm not trying to denigrate anyone. And so this class issue, in my humble opinion and observation, plays a huge role here. This isn't just about Zoomers across the board. It's about a certain type of Zoomer, middle class or below. The highest echelons of society, everyone's doing well there. They've used their wealth to create healthy social environments and insulate themselves from the rest of the world. And so the Zoomer children of these guys are just not suffering the same issues, whether male or female, though the focus obvious here is male, that you might find in the average population, the middle class. and below. And that's where you can observe the sense of being lost and the effects of social media much more potently than elsewhere. So I think this is an extension of what's happened to the United States, a society really riven in twain between the haves and the have-nots without any of the obligations that the haves used to think they had. I've talked about this before. It might be worth making an entirely separate video about this. So the Zoomer dilemma is as much a class dilemma as it is a generational dilemma. Because if you have the money and the concern for your children, you're not just going to outsource, say, paying attention to your children to a tablet. So obviously this isn't universal. But I don't think it's unintentional that we never talk about class anymore in all of these discussions. There are a lot of things going on here, but the dysfunction that we can observe affects a certain type of demographic, and it's as socioeconomic as it is anything else. And I want you to think about it. It's very interesting that nobody wants to talk about that aspect of things. And I think it ties in, to be perfectly frank, very well the fact that most people don't talk about the Zoomers' plight because it doesn't affect them. And it doesn't affect them also, as I said, by class. The highest echelons of society, the cream of the crop, people that are doing really well, typically have children that are doing really well, independent of generation. It's always been the case. It's just that we used to be more cognizant of that fact. And it also used to be that middle-of-the-road people could do okay. Much less so now. We've never before been as separated as we have, not just due to things like wealth, but because of the cultural speciation effect I've talked about a lot, as we are now. And this is why the young Zoomer male has been abandoned. It's a certain type of young Zoomer male. He's socioeconomically not in that bracket. His parents don't know what to do with him. He doesn't know what to do with himself. And he ends up just lost in this ocean without any land of social media, of predators like Hamza and others, and then social media bigwigs like Chad Williamson or take your pick of whoever, who seem to be the pinnacle of success and the only thing worth striving for, and yet these guys are never going to get there in the first place. So they have no perspective, no sense of scale, and the worst thing of it all is that nobody gives a rat's buttocks about them. Not really. People talk about it nominally because it's just too big to ignore, I guess, but let's be perfectly honest. No one's really ever given a rat's buttocks about men, especially men who are not necessarily the most well-to-do, right? Disposable. Men have always been disposable. But it's important to delineate these differences. It's important to understand where it all comes from. I sincerely believe that the Zoomer dilemma is as much a class dilemma as anything else going on right now. And nobody wants to frame it that way. Well, I will. There are genetic factors here. Obviously, there always are. But there are also pernicious environmental factors that have been, whether by intent or otherwise, manufactured. For what it's worth, even though I'm pushing 50, I'm not a Zoomer. But I know if I had grown up in the Zoomer generation as a Zoomer, I would have been just as lost as these other guys, almost certainly. Because that's just the way it is. I'm not from a wealthy family. I'm an average guy at the end of the day. I would have been just as swept up by the current of this social media ocean as anyone else and just as lost. I got, quote-unquote, lucky because I was born earlier. And so I have really almost endless sympathy for the situation all these Zoomers are in. It's such a shame that inasmuch as these guys are being paid attention to, they're being grifted on. They're not being actively helped. I don't exactly know how to help them. I'm at least honest about this. I can offer my observations, my analyses for what they're worth, if they're worth anything. But I don't have a silver bullet. But that's something that Zoomers do need to be aware of. Someone comes along and says, I got the silver bullet solution for your problems. He's probably talking BS. And he probably doesn't have good intentions. So I feel for you guys. I'm friends with Zoomers. I wish I could do more. I hope my videos are of some help. But I do think the beginning of any solution starts with understanding. If you understand how you got there, you might be able to understand how you get out of there too. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons. You guys are the best. You guys keep the channel alive and going. Much appreciated. as are my PayPal donors. You guys are appreciated just as much. And if you can engage in the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, sharing the video, leaving a comment, subscribing if you're not a sub, be much appreciated. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out next time. Until then, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.